How did Pablo Escobar reward loyalty? Was it with briefcases of cash, fleets of cars, or mansions hidden in the hills? Or was it something smaller, lighter, and infinitely more dangerous? In Medellin, whispers said you could measure a man's allegiance not by the papers he signed, but by the glint on his wrist. Imagine a gift so valuable you couldn't refuse it, yet so visible you couldn't hide it. Do you know what Escobar handed to his sicarios, his pilots, even to politicians and judges when he wanted to bind them forever? The answer was ticking, right there on their wrists. Let's start. Part 1. Power on the wrist. Why Rolex became Escobar's passport. Not cash, not cars. His most persuasive bribe ticked 8 times per second. Pablo Escobar operated in a Colombia defined by violent competition, weak institutional reach, and parallel economies where unofficial signals often worked faster than official documents. And he built power by combining cash, coercion, and carefully staged generosity, understanding that status that can be seen is status that can be enforced in real time, which made the object on a wrist a quick, portable credential announcing proximity to money and protection without a word. In Medellin's late 1980s reality of nightclubs, hotel lobbies, and municipal offices, visibility did the paperwork instantly. However, the logic was larger than nightlife, because Escobar cultivated a patronage network where rewards operated as management tools, recognizing operators, reassuring intermediaries, and testing outsiders, so that a visible gift turned private agreement into public fact. And the next time the recipient entered a room, the environment recalibrated itself. Deference from staff, caution from rivals, access from doorkeepers, not as theatrics, but as operational efficiency that shortened conversations and lowered risk. Rooms adjusted to wrists, predictably. By the way, luxury watches are not ornaments. They are codes of status, authority, and hidden meaning. Subscribe to reveal the untold history behind the world's most iconic timepieces. Meanwhile, gifts that could travel across districts and borders proved more useful than cars, houses, or cash, since a car could be traced, a house tied to a deed, and cash looked like a bribe the moment it moved, whereas a watch stayed with the body, fit under a cuff, and signaled rank exactly when rank needed to be recognized: a handshake, a doorway, a seat. Reducing negotiation time in a city where reputation was contested and documents could be delayed. Portability beat paperwork decisively. But the most important piece before any brand discussion is method, because Escobar used visibility to bind people, gifting in semi-public settings, witnessed by enough eyes to travel through rumors, yet private enough to deny specifics, to create durable obligations where acceptance marked protection with debt and refusal signaled distance with potential disrespect, making the wrist, not the wallet, the place where those choices were recorded and displayed. Gifts became ledgers visibly. Therefore, before weighing bezels and model names, we have the spine of the practice: a violent marketplace, a patron weaponizing generosity, a culture that reads symbols quickly, and a tool that converts private loyalty into public access. Which means in this structure, a watch is not decor, but credential, message carrier, and quiet ledger that walks from door to door. A watch carried orders silently. A watch is never just a watch because it compresses 3 stories at once: the giver's power and what association implies, the recipient's role and expected behavior, and the place that recognizes both without paperwork. So seconds become permissions, and permissions become outcomes. And only with this framework in place does the question, which watch, become relevant to why one name dominated the signal everyone learned to read. Context makes the crown legible. Now the model matters because recognizability matters. And Rolex owned recognizability at street distance and across borders. The Cyclops lens over the date, the fluted bezel throwing distinct signatures of light, the crown at 12 as a tiny flag, giving doormen, clerks, and fixers a shared visual language to decode in a blink, while other brands required expertise or proximity that a hallway didn't always allow. Recognition saves words everywhere. However, recognizability alone wouldn't have carried the signal without tool credibility, and the Submariner 1680 lineage and the GMT Master 1675 heritage gave Rolex a history of use where function and myth reinforced each other, so a piece could pass as instrument or status depending on the room. And instruments are harder to dismiss than trinkets when the wearer needs plausible deniability. Tools excuse glamour neatly. Meanwhile, gray market liquidity turned each watch into value that held its shape, with quotes available in minutes in Miami, the Cologne Free Zone in Panama, or among Bogotá, Medellin brokers. So a Submariner or day date could convert to cash or favors quickly if plans soured, making the gift feel like both metal and insurance policy in a business that punished illiquidity. Liquidity underwrote loyalty quietly. But the most compelling advantage was universality across classes and continents, because the same crown signaled the same thing in Bogotá, Panama City, Miami, and Madrid, giving travelers a portable passport that customs couldn't stamp and rivals couldn't mistake, while lesser signals stalled at borders or lost meaning outside specific subcultures. Universality multiplies power reliably. Inside Colombia's stratified late 80s ladder, the wrist became a fast pass where paper stalled, opening hotel lobbies, private rooms, and political corridors with a glance, since a small disc of metal could sit under a cuff and speak loudly to those trained to listen, turning discretion into leverage and saving the dangerous currency of explicit asks. Discretion amplified authority efficiently. Media then mirrored and magnified the code as telenovelas, tabloid spreads, and VHS news B-roll repeated frames where a fluted bezel was shorthand for connection and a steel sports model implied capability. So the audience learned the alphabet of references and the street learned to imitate the screen until fiction and practice taught each other what a crown meant. Screens taught the street relentlessly. Therefore, a quick taxonomy settled inside the organization and outside its walls. Steel sports meant work and proximity to risk. Two-tone Datejusts read as operator status one floor up from danger, and full gold day dates said decision with ceremonial gravity, allowing rooms to sort rank visually before voices spoke and giving lieutenants and soldiers a uniform that a camera could understand. Rank shone before speech instantly. Scene logic made this concrete. A day date ref 18038 or 1828 catching nightclub light. The bouncer's eyes drop to the bezel. No questions follow. The door opens. The message is delivered without a single noun, because in these ecosystems, light is a language and the bracelet is grammar. And grammar disciplines behavior faster than commands. Light carried sentences fluently. Routes kept the theater stocked, with straw purchasers scattering cash across multiple jewelers, stolen luxury pipelines feeding mismatched boxes, and friendly shops sanitizing invoices, while serials learned to travel like passports and movements swapped shells to erase biographies, making the object both anonymous and famous depending on who asked. Serials traveled, stories stuck. But the crucial operational edge was speed. The right watch reduced friction in fraught spaces, lowered the volume of explanations, and moved meetings from "prove you belong" to "where do we sit," accelerating deals where minutes were currency and hesitation carried risk, which is why the brand with the most legible code and the safest resale became the default language of access. Speed crowned the winner, inevitably. Meanwhile, the gift's visibility did more than open doors. It carried the giver's shadow into every room, because a recipient wearing a crown announced his patron before he spoke his own name, turning bodies into billboards and making rumor networks do the heavy lifting of enforcement without a single written order. Bodies advertised power constantly. However, legibility has a price, and visibility attracts both deference and danger, binding the wearer tighter to the patron for protection, which deepened dependency and hardened the habit of reading wrists first and faces second, until the city's most efficient map of power fit under a cuff and ticked in public. Protection shortened distances permanently. Foreshadow the next movement with the simplest choreography. A velvet box opens in a room with just enough witnesses to remember and not enough to testify. A clasp closes on a promise you cannot fold back into tissue paper, and the recipient walks out carrying a story that will now be read by everyone he meets, day after day, doorway after doorway. Part 2. The Gift Trap: How Watches Rank and Access. Refuse the gift and you insult the king. Accept it and you wear the dead. Escobar knew that power was not maintained only with money or bullets. His empire depended on weaving a network of loyalty where obedience was voluntary and visible. That is why watches, more than envelopes of cash, became one of his most effective tools of control. When he placed a velvet box in someone's hands, the gesture carried more weight than a direct payment. The watch did not simply enrich the recipient, it marked him. It announced to everyone who saw it that he belonged to Escobar's orbit. This mechanism turned a private relationship into a public fact. From that moment forward, the recipient was tied to him, indebted not by contract, but by display. Because once the bracelet was fastened on the wrist, it could not be denied without consequence. The way Escobar distributed these pieces was neither random nor generous for its own sake. It followed a precise hierarchy that mirrored the structure of his organization. For the sicarios, the young men who carried out operations and assassinations, the gift was often a steel Rolex Submariner, 16800. It was rugged, reliable, and practical, a tool watch that matched the role of the man who risked his life on the street. The symbolism was clear: a soldier's reward was a soldier's watch. For pilots, whose responsibility was the backbone of the cartel's export routes, the chosen model was frequently the GMT Master 1675 or 1670-50. Its rotating bezel and dual time functionality spoke directly to their profession, tying the object to their mission of crossing borders and schedules without pause. As men rose in responsibility, their wrists reflected their ascent. Mid-level operators who moved from enforcers to coordinators often received the two-tone Rolex Datejust 1603. Its mix of steel and gold announced status without the full ostentation of a solid gold piece, a signal that the wearer had advanced but was not yet among the true decision-makers. The highest category of recipients, politicians, judges, police commanders, and municipal officials, were reserved for the day date, the president. This watch carried no ambiguity. When a magistrate or officer appeared wearing a full gold day date, there was no doubt about the origin of the gift. It was a bribe made wearable, a token of gratitude disguised as elegance. For Escobar, the effectiveness of this system depended on reliable supply. He ensured it through multiple channels. Straw buyers in Miami and Panama purchased watches in bulk with cash, later funneled back through couriers. Stolen shipments entered Colombia through established smuggling routes, while loyal jewelers in Medellin and Bogotá provided sanitized invoices that erased suspicious origins. Serial numbers were often altered, movements swapped, and casebacks polished to obscure provenance. By the time a watch was handed to its final recipient, its official history was gone, but its symbolic weight remained untouched. The trap lay not in the gold or steel, but in the psychology. In Colombian culture, as in many honor cultures, an expensive gift cannot be refused without signaling disrespect. Accepting it, on the other hand, creates a moral debt. A Rolex from Escobar was not something that could be repaid with money alone. It demanded loyalty, service, and silence. Social science explains this dynamic with terms like reciprocity and costly signaling, but Escobar did not need theory. He understood instinctively that a gift of such value forced the recipient to act in return. because wearing it in public meant acknowledging the bond, and acknowledging the bond meant depending on Escobar for protection. The consequences of this system are evident in multiple anecdotes that circulated around Medellin. A bodyguard who suddenly appeared with a gold day date found himself treated differently in nightclubs. Staff cleared paths for him, and rivals understood immediately that he had been elevated. A municipal official whose wrist carried a two-tone Datejust quickly became the subject of suspicion among colleagues who knew exactly what such an upgrade meant. Even a police officer who received a watch and attempted to keep it hidden in a drawer could not escape the rumors. His colleagues noticed, whispered, and treated him as compromised even when the watch was not on his arm. Once a crown was linked to a man, the connection was permanent. This was reinforced by Medellin's Whisper network, which worked faster than newspapers or police reports. News of who had received a new watch spread quickly across cafes, offices, and bars. The symbolism of Rolex became a shorthand understood by all. Escobar rarely needed to repeat his message himself. Rumor did it for him. Every watch he gave away extended his presence into spaces he did not physically enter. Each recipient became a living advertisement for his influence. The genius of this system was its clarity. Steel submariners signaled soldiers, two-tone Datejusts signaled operators, and gold day dates signaled decision-makers or compromised officials. Inside the organization, this created order. Outside, it created recognition. Anyone could read the hierarchy at a glance. Escobar had designed a code that disciplined behavior without needing to be spoken aloud. What made this truly effective was that the clasp not only fastened a bracelet but closed a set of options. Once a man accepted, he had no safe way to refuse future obligations. The watch broadcast loyalty every time it caught the light. It was proof of allegiance that could not be explained away, a debt that renewed itself each morning when the recipient tightened the strap. Escobar didn't need contracts or signatures, only wrists. The clasp closed, and so did his options. He checked the time checked him. Part 3. Golden Handcuffs, Psychology of Control and the Narco Aesthetic. Wear it in public and your body becomes a billboard. Escobar's genius was not only in logistics or violence, but in understanding human psychology. He knew that the most efficient chain is the one people clasp on themselves. The watches he distributed worked this way. They were rewards, but also traps. By giving them in moments of celebration or recognition, he created bonds that felt voluntary, even flattering. Yet beneath that initial pride was a subtle form of imprisonment. Once a man accepted a Rolex, he carried Escobar's shadow everywhere. The object was both protection and evidence, a symbol of status that made the recipient dependent on the man who had given it. The mechanism rested on a universal law of reciprocity. Across cultures, a gift demands a return. But the higher the value, the less possible it is to balance the scales. A Rolex in 1980s Medellin was not a trivial gesture. It was worth several years of wages for many Colombians. That scale of generosity could not be repaid with a single favor. It required continued loyalty, ongoing service, and silence in moments when speaking might seem tempting. Escobar's men understood this instinctively. The bracelet on their wrist was a reminder that their debt renewed itself every day, and the only way to honor it was to keep serving. At the same time, another psychological mechanism took hold: attachment. Once an object of such value is owned, it fuses with identity. Psychologists call this the endowment effect, the tendency to value something more once it belongs to us. For the recipient, removing the watch began to feel like removing part of himself. Selling it was unthinkable, not only because it might anger Escobar, but because it felt like amputating his new identity. The watch became both a status marker and a personal anchor. But visibility added another layer. Wearing a Rolex in Medellin was not a private matter. It was a public declaration. The watch announced its owner before he spoke. Staff in nightclubs or hotels adjusted their behavior. Rivals recalibrated their assumptions. Police officers or bureaucrats who saw the glint of a fluted bezel knew immediately what it meant. This visibility was intoxicating but also dangerous. A man who wore Escobar's gift was not just signaling power, he was advertising allegiance. That made him a target for enemies and a subject of suspicion in official circles. As the risk grew, so too did his reliance on Escobar's protection. Dependency deepened in parallel with prestige. By the way, behind every dial lies more than mechanics. There are secrets of influence, survival, and symbolism. Subscribe and step into the world where a watch is never just a watch. Escobar understood the importance of spectacle. He positioned himself not only as a criminal boss, but as a kind of monarch. And the watches he gave away were his medals. Each submariner, Datejust or Day-Date, was not just a piece of metal, it was a visible extension of his persona. His generosity turned into myth-making. Every time someone walked into a room wearing one of his gifts, Escobar's legend walked with them. It was as if he had multiplied himself across the city, embedding his presence on dozens of wrists that functioned as moving portraits of his power. This practice also created a visual hierarchy inside the cartel. Still sports models like the Submariner signaled labor and danger. Two-tone pieces such as the Datejust indicated rising status. Full gold Day-Dates reserved for capos or political allies signaled decision-making power. Everyone, from associates to outsiders, could read this code instantly. The watches were uniforms, but instead of being worn on the chest, they were strapped to arteries, pumping status into every handshake. It allowed the cartel to function with a silent order, one that required no written instructions. The danger for the wearer was that the gift could not be hidden. Even attempts to escape the bond often failed. Stories circulated about men who tried to pawn their watches or keep them locked away. Rumors alone were enough to draw consequences. To sell a Rolex that Escobar had given was seen as an insult. To hide it suggested shame or betrayal. The safest option was always the same: wear it and accept the implications. The bracelet was no longer jewelry, it was a leash. This paradox created what many insiders later called the golden handcuffs. The more prestigious the watch, the greater the risk of exposure, and the greater the dependence on Escobar's shield of protection. A man's status rose with the gift, but so did the threats around him. By increasing both pride and fear, Escobar ensured that his recipients remained bound to him. They could not step back without losing protection, and they could not step forward without displaying their allegiance. Either way, their future ticked in sync with his. The broader culture reinforced this dynamic. In the 1980s and 1990s, traffickers across Latin America adopted European luxury as a marker of counter-elite identity. Palatial houses, thoroughbred horses, and especially watches became the visual code of power. Escobar's men copied his style, ensuring that hierarchy remained visible even in photographs that would one day become part of the myth. Later, films, music, and television series romanticized this imagery, feeding a cycle in which criminals imitated fictional characters who were themselves imitating real criminals. Rolex, above all, became the crown of this culture, a brand that survived both the man and the era. In practice, the psychology of the gift created a loop that no one could easily escape. The recipient wore the watch in public, increasing his status but also his vulnerability. Increased vulnerability forced him to depend more on Escobar, which in turn made the watch an even tighter shackle. The cycle repeated, ensuring that loyalty was not maintained by fear alone, but by a carefully calibrated mixture of pride, dependency, and the dread of losing both. Escobar had weaponized luxury. He turned Rolex into an institution parallel to the state, a visible, wearable credential that performed the work of contracts, bribes, and medals simultaneously. What looked like generosity was in fact strategy, and what looked like a gift was in fact a trap. The clasp of each bracelet locked more than a watch. It locked a man's future. Part 4. Afterlives and Parallels. Dictators, Mafia, Auctions, and Trauma. From generals' wrists to auction blocks, power keeps perfect time. Some call it provenance, others call it a crime scene. Escobar's practice of gifting watches did not exist in isolation. He was following, consciously or not, a grammar of power that has been repeated by rulers, dictators, and criminal organizations across the world. The idea that a timepiece can act as both bribe and metal is not unique to Medellin. It is part of a global language where watches serve as tools of influence, symbols of loyalty, and portable currencies of allegiance. Dictators throughout the 20th century rewarded generals and ministers with Swiss watches, often Rolex or Omega, as a way to purchase loyalty without leaving a paper trail. In the Gulf monarchies, high horology continues to serve as soft power, with visiting dignitaries leaving palaces wearing pieces worth tens of thousands of dollars, their wrists now carrying a reminder of hospitality that doubles as obligation. Intelligence services in both East and West issued watches as functional honors. Diver chronographs for commandos, GMTs for pilots and agents. In Cosa Nostra, important milestones or oaths were often marked by the gift of a luxury watch, not because the watch itself mattered, but because it cemented an event in memory. Escobar's system fits seamlessly into this long-standing tradition, timepieces as instruments of power. What makes his legacy unique is not only the practice, but its cultural afterlife. Even after his death, watches linked to him, or rumored to be, circulate in whispers and sometimes in markets. Collectors speak of Narco provenance pieces, where the value lies not only in the model or condition, but in the story attached. Yet here, the line between history and myth is almost impossible to police. Serial numbers may have been altered, movements swapped, and casebacks polished. Auction houses occasionally see pieces advertised as Escobar-linked, but most lack verifiable documentation. When claims surface, they often collapse under scrutiny, leading to withdrawn lots or cautious disclaimers. Still, the possibility alone inflates interest and price. A submariner with a credible story can attract attention far beyond its market value, turning violent history into a sales pitch. This creates an ethical problem that shadows the watch market. Should objects tied to criminal empires be sold as collectibles? For some buyers, the answer is yes. They see such pieces as relics of a dramatic era, valuable because of the danger they represent. For families of victims, however, these watches are not trophies but trauma artifacts. They are reminders of lives lost, communities torn apart, and a nation destabilized. To see them glamorized in auctions or fetishized in private collections is, for many, a cruel distortion. It raises the question of whether such items belong in display cases at all, or whether they should be housed in museums or memorials that contextualize their cost. Meanwhile, popular culture has ensured that the symbolism endures. Films, telenovelas, and streaming series repeatedly frame Rolex watches as the emblem of narco power. Actors playing Escobar or his successors often appear on screen with fluted bezels catching the light, reinforcing the association in the public imagination. Music videos from artists inspired by narco culture do the same. The crown has become shorthand, not just a brand, but an entire narrative of wealth, violence, and untouchable status. Even those who know little about horology have internalized this image. The persistence of this imagery demonstrates how effective Escobar's strategy really was. He transformed an object into a code into a culture, and a culture into a myth. The Rolex on a wrist in the 1980s was more than an accessory. It was a passport, a debt, a warning, and a declaration. That meaning has not disappeared. It has only migrated, first into rumor networks, then into media, and finally into the global market for stories attached to objects. Escobar is gone, but the watches continue to circulate, whether in vaults, on auction catalogs, or in fiction. They remind us that power can be condensed into symbols, and symbols can outlive the men who created them. The Day-Date, the Submariner, the GMT Master, these are no longer just models, they are chapters in a story where time was weaponized. Yet the unresolved question is how we choose to remember them. Do we allow these objects to become luxury curiosities stripped of context? Or do we insist on seeing them as evidence of a system that bought silence, corrupted institutions, and turned lives into collateral? The answer determines whether the crown on the dial remains a marketing tool or becomes a cautionary emblem. Escobar proved that a watch could open doors, buy loyalty, and secure silence. Today, those same pieces or their stories open wallets in auction houses. The irony is clear. Once bribing a politician now tempts a collector. The symbol has shifted markets but retained its power. Perhaps the only responsible way forward is to ensure that alongside admiration for craftsmanship, we also remember the cost of the hands that once wore it. Some call it provenance, others call it a crime scene.